So, Wuthering Waves. It's one of the newest Gacha games on the market. It's an open-world RPG that looks pretty promising. It's a lot more action-heavy than typical Gacha games in the same vein, so maybe it's right up my alley. But I gotta know first, how does it hold up from a critical lens? And by a critical lens, I mean my depraved gamer perspective. I just decided the best way to find out was to jump right in, so I played the game for about a week. I'm Juicy Juice Star, and this is my review of Wuthering Waves. In moment-to-moment gameplay, Wuthering Waves is an action game. It's got its fast pace, constant adrenaline, you hack and slash enemies, it's typical action game stuff. It's particularly satisfying due to the presentation, which we'll discuss later, and just a mix of ideas from a bunch of other games. You've got your basic attack, heavy attacks, special abilities, it's all common to action games. You have an invincibility-based dodge system, where dodges are extremely aggressive due to dodge counters allowing bonus damage after a successful dodge, and dodging also feels more forgiving than most games, though that might just be my bias. The game feels like it has a hint of Metal Gear Rising in it as well, because enemy attacks are occasionally parryable, and these parries are triggered by attacking the enemy at the right time. It's all signified by a gold ring around the enemy, and a successful parry will damage the enemy's stance bar. The stance bar functions similarly to the invisible mechanic you might recognize from Elden Ring, which stuns the enemy when it reaches 0, and is reduced by attacks as well as parries. All this comes together to make a really satisfying combat system, even before we discuss anything else in the game. At the same time, the game is open world, so exploration is a big part of it. There's not much to say about the basic idea, though. You walk around, check stuff out, unlock quests, etc., you know the drill. It's got glider and wall climbing, but those have basically become open world standards since the release of Breath of the Wild, so not much to say there. Though uniquely, characters can wall run, which makes climbing much faster and honestly look a lot cooler. There's a grappling hook mechanic that, in theory, would also speed up travel, but unlike a game with similar ideas, Monster Hunter Rise, the grappling hook is both very limited and quite janky in this game. Monster Hunter Rise has much worse wall running, admittedly, but that's neither here nor there. The grappling hook in the Wuthering Waves can only be used to go up and forward simultaneously. It can't really be aimed except for at specific grapple points. It's still a useful mechanic, but the controller layout is really not ideal for easy use. While exploring new areas, you'll find things to do constantly. There's dozens of little puzzle mini-games that I surprisingly found fun, like the little flow pipe thing, or the puzzles where you light up squares with beacon things. I don't really know what to call them. If I'm not a lazy-ass editor, you'll see some examples on screen in this section. The main thing is, like, many of the puzzles are too easy and brainless, but if they were more difficult, they'd need to give more rewards to be worth it, because they really don't give much as is. There are also some pretty neat mini-games, and sections where the entire game turns into a 2D platformer for some reason. Those sections were really fun, I just don't know why they were there. Now, obviously, you'll find groups of enemies in the overworld that are worth fighting either to unlock chests with rewards or obtain echoes. Echoes are essentially equipable versions of enemies which grant abilities and stats to whatever character is using them. There's a lot of different random challenges you can find out in the world, including super powerful, over-leveled boss versions of regular enemies which can be fun to slam your head against. Players can join the Pioneer Association to get rewards from completely exploring areas. Many of the rewards will help with further exploration and give some super nice boons like the ability to place a fast travel point anywhere. That being said, rewards otherwise are pretty middling. Exploration is mostly done for its own sake. There are also collectibles called caskets used for another entirely separate leveling system with its own rewards, but yeah, it's not that interesting. I don't want to talk about it. It's standard collectibles. Exploration is generally satisfying, but it's really nothing too special in this game. We have enough, open-world exploration games to look at to know that this is just kind of the standard fare. Overall, the core gameplay, pretty solid. The exploration is a bit generic, but aside from that, I would say the game has a pretty good first showing. It's honestly pretty neat. Now we get into the meat and potatoes. Wuthering Waves is a gacha game. Obviously this means there are tons of characters to gamble for. There's about 18 or so, give or take, in the current version of the game as of me saying this. The characters are very appealing, with designs that are, attractive, but honestly still quite tame. Some of the outfits are over-designed and messy / nonsensical, but there's nothing too egregious. Overall, the character designs are pretty solid. Each character uses one of 5 weapon types: swords, broadblades, gauntlets, pistols, or rectifiers, aka magic. Weapon types are sort of uninspired, like why are there 2 different types of swords out of the 5 types, but more variety would be nice. You could add things such as like axes, spears, rifles, shields maybe. Like, one of the characters literally uses a spear in his moveset, but he's a sword character for some reason. Whatever. Either way, character playstyles are just loosely based on the weapon they wield. Every character has a very distinct playstyle aside from that, even within the same weapon type, thanks to their unique abilities. Each character has their own basic ability called a resonance skill, an ultimate move called a resonance liberation, which gets very confusing, by the way. Terminology in this game is very odd. And they also have passive abilities known as forte circuits and inherent skills. For example, Chisha, my beloved, focuses on stockpiling thermobaric bullets with her basic pistol attacks and resonance skill, before using an alternate version of her skill to burst the enemy down with her stored bullets. It's a very simple playstyle, but one that does require skill and knowledge of enemy attack patterns, because she really needs a good 5-second opening to land her burst. Alto, another pistol user, is one of the coolest motherfuckers around. He creates mist with some of his attacks, which, attacking through the mist, creates mist drops for him, and dashing through the mist turns him into a whirlwind, granting him a speed boost and consuming the mist drops he has to create seeking bullets that home in on enemies. He can also create a decoy with his resonance skill, prompting enemies to ignore him in favor of his fake clone. Ultimately a fast-paced, movement and positioning-based character who's enjoyable but requires a good amount of skill to play effectively. He's also just not very good. He really needs a buff, but we're not going to talk about that. And characters like Chisha and Alto can also have synergy with each other on the player's team of 3. See, Chisha requires an opening to burst the enemy, and Alto can create a decoy to distract the enemy, so Alto can create the opening that Chisha needs. I figured that out myself, and I think it's super cool, even if it's probably not the most strategic or effective strategy at all. Even without synergy though, characters all have intro and outro skills, which activate when you swap characters with enough concerto energy, which charges over time based on your actions in combat. Unfortunately, pistol users can't parry attacks, which makes sense, but still sucks, as it makes simple characters like Chisha even more basic and overall not as fun to use as they could be. Character swapping, combined with everyone's unique abilities, creates a fast-paced, high-skill combat system with some unique, potentially unintended mechanics such as swap canceling, pre-parrying, and more depending on the characters you use. All these mechanics require a fair bit of skill, but can massively improve performance. Unlike most gacha games, I would say Wuthering Waves is very skill-based, which is pretty cool, honestly. It gives a lot of longevity to the game. Characters affect things that you might not consciously think about, actually, like height affecting movement speed, which is pretty funny to me. Calcaro, one of the 5 stars you can obtain for free, is part of the tall male character type, meaning he runs faster than everyone else in the game. He's a mix of Sephiroth, Virgil from DMC, and Raiden Metal Gear all at the same time. He's awesome. Honestly, one of my favorite characters. Characters have voice lines for different scenarios, which, adds a little bit to them. For example, Tao-Chi has a voice line for sprinting, because she's lazy, I guess. Honestly hilarious, but also kind of annoying, especially if you play in English, which is not me. The size of the character roster is currently not too large, but it has more than enough variety to be quite fun, and obviously, it's a gacha game, they're gonna add more characters over time. You don't have to worry about it. The characters are pretty cool. So I talked about the gacha characters, but what about the gacha itself? The gacha exists. It's basically the same as Genshin Impact, from what I understand, from what I've been told. I don't play Genshin, so I don't know. It's apparently a little kinder overall. You have your standard banners and your limited banners, each with their own focus. Pulls come from a pool of both weapons and characters, which is lame. Seriously, stop making me gacha for weapons. I do not care even slightly. Please, stop. Stop making gacha games where you can roll for weapons, I don't care. As of me writing this, there are 2 limited characters in the game. Jian, who, despite being a sword character, uses a spear for most of his moveset. I did mention this earlier. Why is there not a spear weapon type? Kuro Games, what is up with that? Jian is stupid good at crowd control, and has a resonance skill made for parrying, and a resonance liberation that is both stupid good at crowd control and also overpowered for parrying. So basically, Jian is overpowered. Still though, he's really not necessary for any content outside of the heavily time-restricted challenges, which, by the way, are awful. I hate them. I'll talk more about that later, but I hate them. The other character is Yinlin, who I would definitely let step on me. I mean, come on, look at her. I really did not think I would care for her at all when I first saw her design, but the second I saw her facial expression during her resonance liberation... Anyway, she controls a puppet that marks enemies, and is able to deal damage to all enemies marked this way. Because of this, she's about as good at AoE damage as Jian, maybe better. She's probably one of my favorite characters to play as, all things considered. And no, it's not just because I'm down bad, I promise. The gacha system overall is pretty standard, there's not much more to say on it. It's supposedly more generous than most gacha systems, but I can't really comment on that. I can comment on the currency, which I will do later as well. Yeah. I don't really know how to open this segment, but yeah, Wuthering Waves has challenges, and more importantly, boss fights. It's a skill-based game, and it's an action game. Of course it has these things. Bosses can be fought throughout the main storyline, but mostly just exist as threats in the free roam overworld to be ground into dust dozens of times over for their materials. The boss designs are mostly quite cool, and have enough variance in appearance and attack patterns to where mastering one boss doesn't mean you have the skills to dunk on a different one, meaning practice makes perfect for every single enemy encounter. Boss fights are the most enjoyable form of combat the game has to offer, in my opinion, though admittedly for most of the game they're not particularly difficult to beat, just difficult to master. Most of the fun I got from the boss fights wasn't the struggle to beat the boss, but the challenge of making myself look cool while doing it. And look cool you do when you finally manage to master a boss, with sparks flying and the slow motion of perfect dodges letting you revel in the heat of the moment as you weave in and out of the boss's attacks, making your own attacks in the openings between. In the best moments, fight feels more like a careful dance, a performance where both parties play their part to put on a show. And yeah, I entirely scripted this part out just to make myself sound cool. I probably sound like an idiot. Whatever, cue the boss montage. Wuthering Waves' combat is at its most fun by far when you've fully learned a boss's pattern. Mastery isn't easy to achieve, especially not flawless victory, but it is certainly satisfying. The combat's tight and engaging, tense at all moments, and the only major issue is that because of characters' unique movesets, their parry timing is also quite unique. This means you'll have to master parry timing for multiple characters per boss if you intend to be swapping. And you should be swapping for maximum damage output. I've seen people swapping every, 0.5 seconds. The meta for this game is wild, I'm just gonna ignore it. The bosses range from simple and easy to extremely daunting challenges, and you can have more difficult hologram versions that can be challenged by the most hardened of players. However, my biggest complaint with those hologram bosses is they have time limits, making it feel more like a DPS check. I'm really not a fan of that, and in fact, other time-based DPS check game modes exist, such as the Tower of Adversity and Alloy Smelt, and I dislike those just as much. The Tower requires you to beat all the enemies within a time limit, and Alloy Smelt is almost identical, except instead of defeat all enemies, it's defeat as many enemies as you can within the time limit to get a high score. Both game modes have extremely mediocre rewards and are unbearable to play from my experience. I've heard people say they're good. I don't understand it. They're just extremely miserable. It's just enemies that you find in the overworld, but now there's a time limit, and they have way too much health. There is one additional game mode that I do like, that I do think is extremely fun to play. Depths of Elusive Realm. It's a roguelike game mode where you play as one character instead of a full team, and you collect upgrades for your character and Echo that can make them play much differently than they do in the normal vanilla game, or simply just let you be more aggressive as them. It's genuinely some of the most fun I've had in the game, due both to its simplicity and uniqueness from the rest of the game. Really, if you want to pick up the game just to play this game mode, honestly do it. Overall, the game has great challenges for those who want them, though I find the rewards to be quite mediocre. Whether this is good or bad is up to the individual player, but I am personally not a fan. Did I just say individual? Individual. Individual. That's what I meant to say. The story is bad. It's just bad. Do I have to say more? Okay, well, the main story has many issues. It's exposition dumps everywhere you look. I promise I'm not this bad at speaking normally. Jesus Christ. Exposition dumps everywhere you look. Overwhelming amounts of jargon that the game just doesn't give you time to get used to, and a bunch of climactic and emotional beats that rarely ever feel earned. Most of the major characters are obnoxiously flat. Writing-wise, I mean. Writing-wise. It's not like they don't have boobs. Have you seen Jian? Okay, I made the obligatory gay joke. Can we talk about Tao Chi's tits now? Enough of that tangent. Most of the characters are just really boring and don't have anything at all going on. There's a few standouts, though, who are entertaining, not necessarily through depth of writing, but just sheer charisma. Chisha is fun and friendly, but not in an overbearing way. Alto is hilarious and full of personality. Encore is just straight up adorable. I just love those three. It's mainly those three. For every Chisha, there are, at least 3 Yang Yangs. Seriously, Yang Yang is one of the most annoying characters in any gacha game I've ever played. Doting over the main character is not a personality trait, people. I keep trying to tell people this. It's never gonna work. Outside of the main characters, the story just really doesn't have much going on. It swaps back and forth between not explaining itself at all and explaining itself way too much. The main conflict just doesn't feel significant or threatening until it's suddenly on the front doorstep, and then suddenly it's the fucking apocalypse. I'm sure the lore and world building is good, but if the story and characters aren't good, I'm not gonna care about the lore either. The side stories, though, are a different, story. Some of them are actually quite charming in their own ways. Ling Yang's quest in particular, while quite scuffed, did tell a fairly fun story if you ask me. It is extremely scuffed, by the way. No spoilers, though. I don't want to spoil it. The Inferno Rider exploration quest was also pretty entertaining, even if not particularly deep. A lot of the side quests are pretty bad too, though. Yinlin's quest felt extremely rushed, and all of the emotional beats were unearned, even if she is incredibly hot. Silver-haired Echo Trainer is one of the worst offenders of the idiot plot I've seen in some time, where the plot could have been resolved in minutes if the characters weren't completely stupid. Really, the story is just the weakest part of the game, and it's not even close. The voice direction of the EN dub was also just extremely poor. I'm sure the voice actors are good at what they do, but their performances were bad here. Likely just due to lack of proper direction, if I had to guess. I can't comment on the quality of the other dubs because I don't understand the languages, but I personally use the Mandarin voices. They sound the most natural to me, and I just really like them. They sound nice. It's not the first time a gacha game story has had a rocky start. I mean, my favorite gacha game, Arknights, had a really terrible beginning to the story, but now it contains some of my favorite stories, not just in gacha games, but just in media in general. So I'm confident Wuthering Waves can fix its story and make it more compelling in the future. For now, though, all I can say is that it sucks. It really sucks. Apparently it was like very, very different in the first closed beta test, and they completely changed it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was originally a really good story, though I also wouldn't be surprised if it was originally a really bad story. Either way, the story that's in the full release is just bad. I don't care. If you like it, that's fine. It's just, I think it's really bad. Now as for presentation, Wuthering Waves is genuinely one of the most visually stunning games I've seen in a good while. The graphics are high quality, the animations are extremely detailed, and the effects are beautiful to look at. The monster designs are pretty neat and unique. The generic monsters are pretty cool. There's some very interesting varieties of creatures, like Tic Tacs, which are like little evil Pac-Man monsters, Rose Shrooms, which are giant flowers that shoot lasers like they're Breath of the Wild guardians, and there's Chase Razors, which are a mix of a crab and a car? What? I don't know. Anyway, the sound effects are extremely gratifying as well. It makes you feel rewarded even more than you already do when you pull off a dodge or a parry. Unfortunately, due to this, the music suffers. You can rarely ever hear it during a fight because everything else drowns it out. And, I mean, most of the music isn't that great to begin with. You could just turn down the volume of everything else in your settings and turn the music up, but that doesn't completely solve the problem. Because the music will be too loud when you're not in a fight. It's really not a massive issue, but annoying one at least. The sound mixing is just all over the place, and it's kind of a mess. But back on the topic of animation and visuals, character facial expressions are so full of emotion. Some characters that I would otherwise dislike or just not care about, such as Female Rover, become some of my favorites purely through their facial expressions. I can't comment on Male Rover because I'm not playing as him. I've just never seen a game with such expressive characters, and for most characters, that really helps them. My only issue with the visuals is combat can get really cluttered through like all the particle effects and whatnot, and it makes it difficult to watch enemy movements and respond accordingly at times. But overall, it's beautiful visuals for a game with fun combat and a variety of playstyles, so it's more than enough to make it nearly a 10 out of 10 game. Is what I would say, if not for one little thing. Gacha games. Almost all of them have this one massive problem. It's a problem that can be solved, but it seems nobody cares to solve it. That problem, that issue, it's the daily grind. Players are essentially forced to log on every day and play the game for half an hour to get their daily rewards if they want to stay caught up, especially if they're free to play. The problem with that is playing the same game every day causes burnout. And the worst part is, the rewards aren't even good. Grinding for echoes, XP, materials, etc., it's so slow after Union level 30. It just doesn't feel like your daily grind is progressing anything. Maybe other gacha players don't have this problem, but I can't stand it. Only a week after starting the game, I already stopped logging in daily, and in fact only booted up the game one last time as of writing this script to get some extra footage of Yinlin. I just really got burnt out after playing so much. Because of the incentive to play daily for gacha pulls and XP, I doubt I'll go back to the game. My gameplay will be filled with regret for missing out on potential pulls and level ups if I do, so what's the point? It's a huge issue, and anyone who isn't willing to play every day probably should not play it. It doesn't help that the game takes forever to launch on my system, which, mind you, is a fairly beefy computer. It seems like it's just a me issue, though. I don't know. This game is full of, like, weird bugs and memory leaks, and it's all over the place. I actually didn't mention any of that in this. Yeah, the game's pretty buggy right now. But also, I kind of lied. There's not just one issue, there's two. Yay! The other problem is stinginess. Yes, I know, everyone's been saying, "Whoa, so generous!" But here's the thing. As soon as you run out of your compensation rewards and free launch party currency, progress just slows to a halt. I was very nearly unable to get Yinlin due to the stinginess of Astrite. Alloy Smelt, the game mode that I mentioned earlier, asked me to get 2,000 points for 30 Astrite, not even enough for a quarter of a single pull. I got 900 points, after several attempts, on the recommended difficulty for my level, with the recommended element and powerful characters that were in the meta. Maybe I'm just bad, but like, come on. 30 Astrite? Really? Even if you do get enough Astrite to do pulls, which will rarely happen once the launch compensation runs dry, the rates are just abysmal. 5-star characters and weapons have a rate of 0.8%. Even if you do get a 5-star character on a limited banner, it's only a 50% chance that it'll be a limited character. Don't get me wrong, in a vacuum these rates wouldn't be awful, but Astrite drops are extremely stingy. And these two massive issues are what caused me to entirely drop the game less than a week after starting it. If even one of these issues were solved, I might keep playing the game. And I know what you're gonna say. Juicy, the point's to make money. They want you to pay for the gacha. No shit. But here's the thing. The paid currency is just as stingy as the free stuff. And for me, I refuse to spend money on a gacha game unless the game's friendly to me as a free-to-play first. If the game's not gonna be friendly to its free-to-play player base, it should not be free-to-play, period. And a game that handles this well is Arknights. Yes, I'm an Arknights shill. No, I'm not sponsored. Hypergriff totally should sponsor me, though. My 30 subscribers will truly save their bottom line. Jokes aside, though, and to keep this short, Arknights is an extremely friendly game to free-to-play players, and has an auto-battle feature to grind whatever maps you want to do daily for resources. You get weekly supplies of Arundum, the gacha currency, and it's enough to allow the average player to get limited operators if they save exclusively for those banners. Because of this generosity, I've been a spender on Arknights for some time now, renewing my monthly card every time it's about to run out. At the end of the day, I'm sure many people will enjoy Wuthering Waves, but I've wiped my hands clean of it already. I might still follow the fanbase to see what new characters come out, but I really just can't play games like this, and I would personally tell anyone struggling with money to not waste their time when there are plenty of games out there that will give you more for less. Ultimately, though, Wuthering Waves is fundamentally an entertaining experience, so hey, if you think the FOMO won't get to you, and you don't mind not having meta-level characters, maybe give it a try. With all that said, I will be playing Zenless Zone Zero next month, so we'll see if I drop it just like Wuthering Waves. I really hope it ends up respecting my time more, though, because it honestly looks really fun. That's the end of the video, though. I might make more stuff like this in the future for other games I play, I don't know, depends if I feel like it. If you have any thoughts, make sure to comment them down below, but be civil, alright? I've been Juicy Juice Star. You've been pretty awesome for watching this, and I'll see you whenever. Yeah, I might just never make another video again, we'll see.